Hello, this is Alex Burkett, and you're listening to the Long Game Podcast. In this episode, I'm chatting with Ryan Law. This is actually the second time he has been on this podcast. Ryan is the Director of Content Marketing at Ahrefs. He has 13 years experience as a writer, content strategist, team lead, marketing director, VP, CMO, and agency co-founder. He has helped dozens of companies improve their content marketing and SEO, including Google, Zapier, GoDaddy, Clearbit, and Algolia. He's also a novelist and the creator of 2 content marketing courses. In this conversation, we talked about what Ryan has learned since we last chatted, since moving from animals to Ahrefs, the current and future state of SEO and content marketing, echo chambers, thought leadership and how to build it, digital water coolers, and why we all yearn for a life in the woods. Without further ado, here is my conversation, part 2, with Ryan Law. I was at these 3 conferences with 3 different kind of crowds, SaaS founders, marketing leaders, and then more kind of content marketers. And just being in person is one of those things that helped me like break out of my little echo chamber. But I found at times, like, I don't know if like the digital watering holes or water coolers have gotten like more homogenous, which seems crazy because it used to be like inbound and growth hackers and like these few communities. But like, where do you go now other than Slack channels? It's like LinkedIn. I feel like sometimes I'll pull away from LinkedIn and just feel nothing. I'll feel nothing. like I'll try to go on and like, you know how you're supposed to like comment on things to you know, you're supposed to engage with other people. So then like they see your comments and like that helps the algorithm. I'll go on and I'll try to comment on things. And I'm like, I don't have any thoughts on any of this.
Yeah, it has. LinkedIn is the only like channel I use these days where I feel like I actually get rewarded for sharing stuff. Like I feel like Twitter now just kind of beats me around the face and tells me that I'm awful and gives me like 3 views on everything I share. And then even then, like when you're trying to have a discussion with people, it is so hard. Half of it's AI generated now. Half of it, maybe I'm just becoming too cynical and old to have anything to say on the topic. And I went to Brighton SEO recently. And I'm just like a super introverted, old-fashioned, like, you know, I've been sitting blogging in my bedroom for like 14 years now. You know, I never saw the value in conferences. But even having a couple of actual conversations with real people about like things you've written, that was probably gave me enough energy to keep me going for the next year, hopefully. You know, hearing that some company decided not to use AI content or something like that, that can be a lot more rewarding than just, you know, 50 impressions on a tweet or something and no actual substantive feedback on it.
Well, the conversation is so different. And I think partially because when you're on LinkedIn, regardless of how authentic you claim to be, like there's a level of performance because you know that the cameras are on, so to speak. You know that your potential customers, your potential leads are potentially viewing what you're writing. Whereas like at a conference, you sort of turn that side of the brain off and you just have the real conversation. So I think any level of like online communication, unless it's in a private Slack channel or something that's very well curated, there's some level of performance where you're not just speaking to the other person, you're also speaking to everybody who's reading and like viewing the conversation. It's like you've got a like live stream feed of what you're doing.
Yeah, it's a really good point. And I realized that I only use social media in like a very cynical, performative way. And I think I'm okay with that. Like it is a marketing tool for me. I don't tend to share stuff about myself and my personal life. And maybe that, you know, slightly ruins the experience. Maybe that I could be getting more out of those platforms if I did. I'm just not interested in that. I keep those 2 sides of my life very separate. And I'm okay using those channels as a marketing thing. But yeah, you actually meet someone in real life and you get all the kind of interaction and like the body language and the non-verbal cues you get from people as well. It's a lot easier to actually open up and have a conversation about something. Maybe that's the part that I really miss, working remote for so long.
Yeah, I want to ask you about that conference because we'll go into SEO, and I think being at Brighton, like you're kind of in the lion's den of SEOs. I just really quickly want to ask: did you see that LinkedIn post of that guy who like proposed to his girlfriend and was like here's the 5 lessons that it taught me about B2B SaaS sales or something like that.
I did. I know.
I couldn't tell if that was like performance art or if it was like true, like he was like unaware that if he was self-aware, that is the greatest piece of LinkedIn performance art I've ever seen.
And honestly, even if he's not, I find it kind of weirdly endearing. I don't know. He had this big moment in his life and he was like, right, I'm going to talk about this and make something valuable and useful for other people on the back of it. Like, it's very easy to like, punch down and say, oh my God, what an idiot, you're ruining. Like, go and spend time with your wife, get off LinkedIn. But I kind of loved it in many ways. I wouldn't do it myself though, put it that way.
I think it's not incredibly different from like other uses. So LinkedIn is like palpably cringy because it's more professional based, but like I think our inclination now societally is to do the same thing on other platforms. Like if you're viewing a concert, you think, oh wow, I should record this and post this to Instagram. It's not even like you're like almost always we're taking ourselves out of the experience and thinking this could be content. So I do think it's a broader thing. And I think on LinkedIn, it's just so obvious because of how jarring a personal experience is when used as content for a professional platform.
Yeah. And I think that a lot about like, I quite often have interactions with people and it feels like the entire interaction is predicated on me being fodder for the marketing machine that you've built. And I'm sure it goes both ways as well. Which, yeah, it's not always a pleasant experience, is it? And like, I wrote something at Animals years ago about like, the worst thing you could do in marketing content is make people feel like they're being marketed to. And I think that's what you get, with a lot of these interactions, podcast interviews, stuff like that. It's very transactional. Like quite often they have like an agenda, they have their talking points they want to say, and they just basically want to get your name and your logo on the podcast. Which is one of the reasons I find talking to you very, very refreshing because it does not have that vibe at all.
Thank you. Yeah. Well, I mean, partly it's because I barely have a plan and I figure we've already had a conversation. So I think we'll probably be able to just riff. So I hope you are okay with the fact that I'm underprepared today. I do think it's interesting because we talked 2 years ago, right? You were at Animals. I actually looked it up. You were a director. So you eventually become VP of marketing at Animals. 2 years ago, you've since joined Ahrefs. Is that how you pronounce it? Ahrefs.
It's up to you, really, but Ahrefs is the internal company pronunciation.
Ahrefs. So you're director of content marketing at Ahrefs now. What do you know now about SEO and life and marketing that you didn't know then? Bring me up to speed on everything you've learned since.
That is a good question. I've been thinking a lot more about like I feel like I've learned a lot about marketing, less about content and more about marketing. I feel like marketing always felt like this big mystery to me, and I never understood why I could make all these things and put them out to the world, and like whether or not they would actually work would be such, be a mystery. I'd have no gut intuition about whether I was doing the right thing or not. And I kind of realized over the years that like this creator-centric approach to marketing is just the wrong way. Like marketing is not a writing problem. It's not a content creation problem. The things that generally work in marketing, as I've seen now joining a product company, are having a really cool product that people genuinely want, adding something new to that, having some new feature, some like excuse to talk about that product again, or else, giving something away for free. The kind of role of product, I think, is so much more important than what I used to think as a content creator was, content. Maybe that's the agency vibe coming in where we don't get involved in, for the most part, like our customers' companies, they are doing their thing with product and we come in as like service providers and we create content to market it. I just feel like marketing's not really a writing problem anymore. And what's something I'm trying to help my team with is actually just, instead of worrying about how they're writing these blog posts, I'm trying to get them to go and do cool stuff. I think it was actually I think it was you that shared that Ryan Holiday post with me about, you want to be a writer, stop doing that. Go and actually do something interesting worth writing about. And that's basically been like the last like year's experience I've had, instead of trying to marginally improve this blog post and this paragraph, like how about you go and interview some people or go and like do a stunt or do something you've never done before. And the words are kind of just stitching together that experience in a way that other people can understand.
That was always my favorite content to write when I was at CXL, was when I had done a project. Like I still think of this blog post where this is cool too, because I know you're learning Python, but I wanted to learn R. And I, was looking up tutorials and taking data camp courses. But eventually you realize that you sort of need some aim or project or like at least like some outcome that you're working towards. Otherwise it's too amorphous of a problem. So Pep gave me basically a month and a half of runway to do this data-driven personas project where I interviewed, I think I had behavioral data as well as qualitative attitudinal data. And essentially, I just did like clustering to find like commonalities in our personas and then layered on qualitative data on top. But I used R for all of it. And I got to write a blog post about doing that. No idea how it performed in terms of traffic, but there was something that I was like very proud of in that like, this is real. I did this and I could explain to you how I did this. And that's just one example, but I love reading that stuff too. I love it when somebody, at HubSpot, we had this whole thought leadership program that Ali spearheaded actually. And I think it was called like Made It HubSpot or something. But she would go around to different teams and she's like, we're doing so much cool stuff. Like, why are we continuing to rehash like what is content marketing type articles? Let's write about like what our team is doing. And I always loved reading that kind of content as well. It just felt so much more tangible to me.
Yeah. And it's very rare as a content marketer to write about something that you actually know about yourself, that you have done and experienced. Like our skill set is kind of like this layer that sits above other people's experiences. And our job is to synthesize it into new formats. And it is deeply fulfilling when you get a chance to actually do the thing, write about the thing. And instead of having to worry about making, something boring interesting, you get to make something interesting. And that's so much like less effortful. And you generally I think get rewarded for that in terms of other people reading it and engaging with it and actually learning stuff from the content you share. I'm trying to nudge all of our writers away from writing about stuff that they have a theoretical understanding of towards things that they have done and they know, or they can go out and do. And although it's not always possible because, keywords have to be written at some point, I'm already seeing a change in, I think, how they feel about content, how people receive it. You can tell that they have a bit of skin in the game with the things they're actually writing about now. And it's just more fun. It's just way more fun.
That feels more appropriate for the audience that maybe Ahrefs has. Animals, there was something, I loved reading your writing, but it was a lot of times based in theoretical concepts or abstractions, but they would be steeped in experience from all of your experience. You're doing content marketing for a content marketing agency. You obviously have all of the clients and kind of the data there, but you would use frameworks, from we talked about it last time, but Hegelian dialectic, and you would explain this is a concept that explains this thing in content. And I think contextually, it makes so much sense because you've got a bunch of content marketers who are writing nerds who are deeply interested in this stuff. And in the same way that when I was writing the CXL stuff, I could geek out on these minute details of sequential testing versus traditional frequentist approaches. But it only works in those contexts. There's not a lot of people who are sitting there just waiting to read that latest article on some new abstract concept.
Something I always worried I was doing with the animals content, and I try and check myself for it now, is just writing stuff that is basically, purely theory. Is this something that's actually helpful to somebody else? Because I think, it works as this kind of stylized form of content where you're trying to show the big theory and the big framework that sits above how things work. But it's very easy to write something that's just an intellectual curiosity, and even if someone reads it and loves it, they can't go away and do anything with it. So I'm trying to be a bit more empirical and a bit more practical with stuff I write at the moment, because SEO, I think in particular, even more than content marketing, is theories abound. We all live in the dark. We're all trying to reverse engineer what Google wants us to, understand how it functions. So there's so many theories out there. I kind of want to avoid adding another bunch of baseless ideas into the mix and be a bit more practical with content.
To be honest, I've been wondering the same thing on my side because we've got this newsletter, Field Notes, and I've taken it over and I'm writing a weekly newsletter. So a newsletter is fun because you don't have to really conform to any formatting or algorithmic incentives. Search is trying to serve up the right content to the right query, and LinkedIn is trying to whatever, it's attention based. So I get a little bit more of a playground there. And my mind naturally gravitates towards sort of the conceptual. But what I've found I've been doing the last probably four or 5 weeks is it's more like clearing the brush. It's more taking a lot of these theories and abstractions people have built up and going back to first principles and knocking them down. So one recent essay was on like how you've got content, which is a product. You've got platform, which is delivering that product via some sort of an algorithm, whether that's like natural, just human curation or an algorithm in the sense of like Google or LinkedIn. And then you've got the user. And it was just sort of going down to the root principle of like, when we talk about content, we like have this very amorphous bucket of like, right for the user and this, and that. But this understanding that like you have a product, you want to get it in the eyes of the user, and you've got some intermediary. And it was just like really boiling it down to like these very fundamental principles. So I feel like I've been doing more, there's a lot of noise out there nowadays, and I'm trying to maybe just bring back a little bit of, hey, it's not as complex as we're making it, like that kind of vibe. Like it's not dumbing things down, but it's saying like, hey, like you don't actually need all of these crazy frameworks. Like it's a really simple concept.
There is this almost like economy of noise out there where you reward the most novel, interesting, new, unfamiliar, amazing sounding frameworks, but so much of the, actual stuff that works when it comes to growing a business and marketing it is very, very simple and boring, just showing up, writing more content than other people. There's this kind of like people that make a living off of obfuscation. There's actually a very well-known SEO guy who I didn't know about until I joined Ahrefs and kind of threw myself back into this world. And he's got this kind of strangely loyal cult following, and he's built it entirely by sharing stuff that is just like total nonsense. It is like, the Deepak Chopra of SEO. It's like all these complicated concepts about semantic entities and things that there is nothing actually underneath the veneer. But there's a subset of people that love that. They love the complexity. They love the mystique. They love not quite knowing what understands. And it's awesome when you get somebody who is willing to do what you did in that, sit down, say, clear all the concepts off the table. Here are like the 3 things that underpin this. This is ultimately what you should understand. And then, go and make your own version of it.
Well, there is sort of a pragmatic reason for this too. And what I've learned over the years of running this agency is like, who doesn't care about that stuff is executives who have the power to buy SEO or SEO tools, right? It's like those people actually do not want the semantic SEO, there's a certain audience for that for sure. But what I realized was in talking to that audience, they're not the people who are going to buy our services. So it's like, actually, you don't want to make the person feel stupid who might potentially like work with you. So there is a pragmatic reason for that as well. So on the SEO front, I'm actually curious. I started out, asking sort of tongue in cheek, like what you've learned in the past 2 years, but like SEO is chaos right now. It feels like that anyway. Like there's a lot of noise out there. I don't even know where to start with this question, but you've got like the impact potentially of LLMs, over exaggerated or not. Like they're, people are like, is Google losing market share to ChatGPT, Perplexity? You were just at Brighton. I think you said one of your takeaways was that the satisfaction with Google SERPs is low. There's a lot of dissatisfaction. Seemingly good sites have been tanked. You've got Reddit ranking everywhere. You've got big websites like Forbes, excelling. What is going on in search right now?
Man, I wish I knew the answer to that.
Is it truly dying this time?
No, I don't think it is dying. I don't think it, even as I'm sure you'd say, like even if it did die, there would be some kind of other form of it which would emerge. People are always going to need to be connected to knowledge and information. That's fundamentally what search does. I do think something I have a new appreciation for is just the complexity of search, like the sheer challenge of what Google has to do every day. Because at Ahrefs, like we have our own search engine. Like we've been crawling the web at search engine scale for such a long time that it was kind of a natural extension of that to build our own search engine. And it's really hard. It's really, really, really hard to do that. Seeing all the conversations like the team has, all the problems they're working with every day. And I'm a kind of a subscriber to the theory that, Google is just so intensely complicated now, like machine learning model upon machine learning model, that not only is it hard for us to work out what's going on within that black box, I think it's probably quite hard for most people at Google as well. There's lots of different business units with different objectives, revenue-driven teams, search-driven teams. And I think we're just in a bit of a situation where, like, they were probably surprised by this influx of staggering amounts of content being created by companies as a knock-on of LLMs, and not quite knowing how to deal with that, and probably scrambling to try and improve the quality of SERPs a little bit. And I think we're in the rough patch where they haven't quite got that right. And yeah, it'd be interesting to see what I'm optimistic in the next year or so things will get a bit better and there will be more quality in the SERP, but I don't see much of that at the moment, unfortunately.
Something I wonder is, I don't know if there's data on this, but in terms of like user satisfaction, like a writer is going to look at a SERP and be like, this is bad writing, because they're a writer and they understand that this is like optimized for SEO essentially, and not necessarily like style or knowledge share. SEOs are going to look at a SERP and say, this is not good quality because there's better content, and like the algorithm should be serving things differently. They're very close to the problem. But sometimes I wonder if like the general population is just like, this is fine, right? Like maybe they're totally cool. They don't understand that Forbes maybe shouldn't be ranking for best creatine supplements. So like, I wonder sometimes if the satisfaction, like there's a higher discrepancy where we who are so close to the problem see it and we see that the SERPs are bad. But like your average, like your parents or like your, you know, somebody who works at like, whatever, like a restaurant, like they search something and they're like, this is fine. I don't know if there's any merit to that or if there's any data, but it's just a thought that kind of pops out from now and then.
I think you're totally right. I actually wrote an article about this that was not very well received because it was just very much against the zeitgeist. But I kind of argued that I think for the average user, like search is in many ways the best it's ever been in terms of your ability to just put a query in and get an abundance of like pretty relevant, pretty accurate information back. Like anyone, that works, you know, generally for most people in most use cases, I think Google serves the information they need. But as you say, like we are the power users of Google. We are the ones that always see these problems as they bubble up. We're the ones that want to hold it to a higher standard. I think in some ways that's actually a good function of SEOs. Like we get a lot of flack for, you know, potentially trying to game the system and stuff, but there is almost this protective element where a lot of people do call problems out when they see them start to emerge. Because, you know, maybe Forbes appearing in SERPs is not the end of the world today, but, you know, leave that unchecked for 10 years, maybe the quality of it will be vastly undermined. You know, it'd be hard to get accurate information for all the affiliate spam that's out there. But yeah, I generally think us being annoyed is very different to the general public being annoyed and to Google losing a bunch of market share or anything like that.
What was the article that you wrote that was not well received?
What was it called? It was how SEOs make the web better, something like that. It was actually kind of in response to the Verge piece where they said, you know, we were all like content goblins that were spamming the web everywhere. And I thought, I'll put some positivity out into the world. And I basically said, you know, Google's actually pretty good. And then everything blew up with people saying how terrible Google was. So, yeah, before its time, too late maybe.
I like that. I wanted to ask, actually, this is kind of a throwback, but you had another article that I loved, but I think got some pretty critical feedback when you were at Animals. Let me know if you want to strike this for any reason. But
No, bring it on. No.
All right, cool. You wrote a piece called The Quality Cliff. Do I remember right? That got pretty... People were freaking out on LinkedIn about that, right?
Yeah, LinkedIn in particular. It was a really weird piece.
Can you tell me about that?
Yeah. So the basic premise of it was that I kind of felt like everyone at the time was talking about how important quality is. You know, we should always strive to make the best things we can. And to your point about like trying to communicate to like CEOs and executives, I wanted to make the observation that like we totally should do that, but we live in a world of constraints. You know, we can't afford to make everything intensely amazing because it's not worth it and we have finite resources in a lot of cases. So it was basically a pragmatic argument for saying that, you know, work out whether something is worth the effort of whatever marginal quality improvements you intend to make with it. And in some cases, be okay with putting something just functional out into the world, which I thought was a fairly like, you know, nothing to be upset about within that. But yeah, LinkedIn, plenty of people that were basically read it as like, you know, me advocating that, you know, quality is this, you shouldn't aim for quality. Quality is terrible. You know, don't do that. And it was probably the most vocal pushback I've had against an idea, but I also had some of the most like affirming comments in DMs from, you know, executives at companies saying, this was actually super useful. Like, you know, we're talking about this balance every day. That our job is basically investing resources into different plays, and this was a useful framework. Most of the pushback that I saw came from writers, and we are people that care a lot about the craft, and I can understand why maybe you wouldn't want to denigrate quality within content, but yeah, it was an interesting one. I'm glad you spotted that because I remember that.
That's a shibboleth. So there's two routes that I want to go on this one. One is like, I read it very rationally. I think you weren't arguing for putting bad content out into the world. Like you functionally said that there's like a threshold to meet, and then past that, there's diminishing marginal utility. So from an expected value perspective, if, for instance, the maximum output you're going to get from an article is $10 and $1 gets you that $10, like there's no sense business-wise in spending $5 to get that $10. You would actually rather buy the $10 5 times with 5 different articles, right? But you're still hitting that minimum threshold to be able to get that $10. Like anything below that is bad quality and you shouldn't put it out. Like, is that the argument?
Yeah, exactly that. Because obviously the inverse point was that I see a lot of companies that do not go far enough and they never hit that minimum threshold required to get any return on their content. And I see all this kind of AI SEO spam that companies are putting out today. It's cheap, but it still costs money. But if it never ranks for any of the target keywords, that is a complete loss of that budget. So it's a kind of a false economy in that sense.
Right.
So yeah, I really wanted people to think about what is the minimum threshold required to get results? And then is it worth further investment beyond that point?
How do you define the minimum effort required to get results? Like, how do you know where that point is?
Yeah, I mean, it's tricky, isn't it? I guess thinking about like all the different types of content a company creates, there are very different possible outcomes from all of them. If you're an SEO driven company and you already rank for 100,000 different keywords, ranking for one other slightly product relevant keyword, even if that goes exceptionally well, like it's not the be all and end all, difference to your company. Whereas if you're writing like your company's manifesto, the reason you exist, putting this bit of content that you're going to reference with every sales prospect you talk to for the next 5 years, then the upside of getting that right is pretty staggeringly big. And content, everything probably falls on some kind of spectrum between those two things. So we worked with a customer once actually where we were doing SEO content for them. And I had to have a talk with my team because we were picking a bunch of keywords. Customer was happy. We were ranking for them pretty well. The customer seemed happy. And then they churned 3 months afterwards. And the situation there was basically like we were doing everything we said we would, but we were always targeting keywords and monthly search volume that even if you do it very well, is not enough. It is not impressive. It does not move the needle. Like 50 MSV keywords for a company that fundamentally needed like hundreds of thousands of new visits every month to win. And that was a big realization for me. You have to judge everything by what the outcome of it has to be, as opposed to whether somebody gives you good feedback, or whether you feel good about it, or that kind of thing.
What do you think about the idea of SEO content as a phrase? I know that at Animals, y'all didn't really care about SEO, keywords, etc. At Ahrefs, like my read is that you are targeting keywords, but like you're also interweaving, it's the whole product-led content that Ahrefs perfected, right? It's kind of a blending of product-based content, thought leadership, as well as SEO. So what are your thoughts on SEO content?
I think, there's a reason, probably the ascendancy of content marketing is probably also the ascendancy of SEO. Like there are not many marketing channels, are there, where you spend a certain amount and you get potentially better returns on that investment every single month thereafter. It's very hard to compete with search content, ranking for a bunch of very relevant product keywords in terms of the benefit of that. I think we just reached a point where at Ahrefs, we realized that we were writing, even if we were ranking, it was stuff that wasn't very interesting, wasn't very exciting for people. And I think when competition is such as it is in like the kind of SERPs we go after, like highly contested, I think there is a benefit to trying to rank, but also trying to make stuff really cool and really interesting. So we were willing to like layer in this additional, process for making content better than what it needed to be, I think. But it's hard, any company, I think, hard pressed to rule out SEO as a channel. I think it's just too good and too cheap, even today when it's still extremely competitive.
Mm-hmm. Well, on that note, like distribution is something I've been obsessed with lately, right? That whole SAN content platform user. One topic that you brought up in the podcast intake form was the role of thought leadership in marketing. And like on like a very gut level, I understand what we talk about when we say thought leadership. But like then there's the pedantic side of me that it's like, what does that actually mean? Is that like new, novel, contrarian concepts? Is that like it? In some ways, I believe that like very basic SEO content across the span of like a portfolio can also build your stature as a thought leader in a space. So to me, it like feels like an entity and not necessarily a type of content. I don't know where I'm going with this question. What did you want to talk about with regards to thought leadership? Like where, I guess, like, do you look at it as a format or like an end result? Like what does thought leadership mean to you?
I think as an industry, we are plagued by a lack of consensus on this term. And like most of the smart people I know always say like, oh, such a stupid term, thought leadership, because it kind of is really stupid in many ways. I think it is a desired end state. I think that is how I find it most useful to think about, Every company, every person wants their brand to be somebody that's listened to, somebody whose opinion is cared about, somebody that has the power to kind of shape the discourse in their industry. And I think with that in mind, certain types of content are more conducive to achieving that than others. To your point, if your company basically doesn't have an online footprint and you end up doing a bunch of search content and appearing for like 100,000 different keywords, that has a huge impact on thought leadership. You're suddenly visible. You suddenly have like an existence in the world. But if that's kind of the status quo and every company's in that position, maybe getting your exec team to write some really spicy opinions or conduct some data and some research, I think that is really conducive to thought leadership, sharing ideas that can't be found anywhere else, raising the personal profiles of individuals at your company. It's fundamentally a desired end goal. Everyone wants to do it. And I think, certain types of content are just plain better at doing it than others.
The way I've thought about it is like sort of, I don't know how you would describe this, but like basically like when you think of category, you think of brand. And that's like broad level in terms of market and positioning, but like down to content, you think like, okay, ABM, and then there's like a person you follow or a brand you follow. And that to me is like the end state of thought leadership. Now, for these other formats that we're talking about, so like SEO distribution channel distributes content to end user. I know you can build an audience like just posting on LinkedIn, right? Or posting on Twitter, 0-click content. But is there viability in 2024 and beyond to actually distribute longer form content via different channels? It feels like to me like all of them have sort of dried up. They're not incentivizing linking out to other sources. Like it's really just like on platform, like you are a LinkedIn influencer, but you're not necessarily bringing people to your website, versus SEO is still kind of bringing in traffic. How do you feel about that in terms of like distributing content that would be conducive to thought leadership?
I love that point. And something we were talking a lot about at Ahrefs is actually our role is not to distribute things to earn traffic. We're trying to distribute like ideas, basically. And the big part of that today is acknowledging that you will not be rewarded with traffic when you do that, lots of places. Because I joined Ahrefs and it's this organic search behemoth. They get so much traffic. And the idea of me writing like a clever little thought leadership post and maybe getting, 20,000 visitors to it, it was still a drop in the ocean compared to what like the rest of their content was doing. And I had a minor crisis and was thinking like, what value can I add through this mechanism? Like, why do they even need me? But then you kind of have this realization that, in some ways, one actual end-to-end read of that type of content is probably more conducive to like getting a customer than maybe 2,000 visits to some fairly generic top-of-funnel SEO blog post. So I think there is a lot less visible benefit from that type of content. So you post on LinkedIn, you get penalized if you add the link. So maybe you don't add the link, you just share the core ideas. And even if no one ever clicks back to your website from that, like, in that kind of immediate interaction, I think there's still a huge amount of unseen benefit to that. People following you, checking back on your ideas in the future, just simply remembering that you write for this company and thinking, oh, maybe, if that need ever comes up in my life, I might go and see how much they cost, all that kind of thing. So I think, we generally, we all have to shift away from trying to get page views back to websites, which is hard because that is generally how most marketing reporting processes work. We bias towards visible data. And it's quite hard for me to do my monthly report and say, well, no one seems to read this blog post, but I think it was quite useful and quite cool. But that's kind of what I have to do in some cases.
People are scrambling for attribution with net new channels, or maybe, I don't know if they're net new, but it's like what is measured can be managed, like that old saying. So like you've got the social thing, and I feel like I want to bring this point up in a second, but like this idea of like earlier stage versus like big company drop in a bucket, like you had mentioned. But I do think there's something here on this idea of complete attribution as well. So the state of SEO, to me, like I just wrote an essay about this. It's actually remarkably stable. Like in terms of like search volumes growing, Google's market share has dropped very slightly, and it's mostly Bing that's taking it up. Search revenue is increasing, and like Rand Fishkin put out the study where it's like Google still drives the bulk of internet traffic. Granted, it's not where people are always spending their time. But then like there is this idea that like, yeah, consumer behavior may very well change. To what extent, we don't know. But like I went to Puerto Vallarta for Ali, my co-founder's 30th birthday. And she met a woman there who booked the hotel that we were all staying at from ChatGPT. Basically just like did the whole custom, like, oh, plan me an agenda, like that whole thing. And that's going to be a world like that's somebody who's not working in marketing. They're not an SEO. They're not necessarily early adopter in like the, you wouldn't expect her to be an early adopter. It's happening. And we're seeing that already with some of the surround sound SEO stuff that I had launched at HubSpot. We're doing that for some clients here and then ourselves. And it's not like you can't really tell if people are coming in via a ChatGPT like conversation or perplexity or something like that. There's this whole murky world where you sort of have to say, yes, the things that we're doing to appear in these places, sort of the preconditions are worth it, even if we can't yet, outside of like direct, self-reported attribution, even if we can't say quantitatively, this is worth it. It feels worth it to me. Kind of a Wild West, right?
I do. I love that. I think there is probably like an inverse relationship between how easily attributable like a traffic source is and how much like benefit and leverage there is available on that. The ones that offer perfect attribution, by their very nature, everyone can see how they function. Everyone can see that it's worth investing in. So everyone probably will invest in it. And it's those that have like no attribution, but are maybe huge potential in this kind of crazy Wild West, like, let's make a big bet and see what happens. No attribution, but probably tons of like opportunity for companies that are willing to be the first few companies to do that. And I always think companies undervalue the role of like intuition and gut feel in terms of whether content is working. Maybe I just have like I'm just terrible at attribution, and I have my own blind spots, and I bias towards not attributing traffic and that kind of thing. But at Animals, at Ahrefs, we do things that we think work, that we feel work, based on interactions we have with people that we can see in terms of like qualitative and subjective feedback from people. If you're too myopic about only investing in things with good attribution, you're going to miss a ton of opportunities, I think.
I think so. There's alpha in places that are undervalued or misunderstood at this point. There's still, though, like this shift between like small company to large company, right? From Animals to Ahrefs, you're probably already seeing some of this. I was always an early stage startup guy, and then I joined HubSpot, and I realized that the scale of your ideas, or at least the end state, sort of if we hit all the green lights, like what's the output? What's the outcome? It has to be big enough to warrant investment. Otherwise, people just don't take it seriously. Versus like the small scale, and I'm not sure how it worked in Animals, but like with Omniscient, we'll do incredibly small things. We'll just reach out to our network and like ping them on LinkedIn, just like one-to-one messages. We'll fly to a city for a conference and have coffee meetups. And like, if we get one client from that actually matters quite a bit. We see that in our revenue data. Versus like at this high scale, there sort of needs to be a pretty large bet. So even in this world of like murky attribution, tell me how that goes. Like, I mean, you're talking about like drop in a bucket, like the ventures that you put forth, like how do you frame those ideas in this context of like, we're already doing very well. We've already got scaled channels. So like, how do you package up ideas in a way that says, this is worth doing at a big company versus small company?
Well, so one interesting point on that is, I think Ahrefs is definitely a lot bigger in terms of like revenue than Animals was, because software company versus agency. But in terms of headcount, Animals at its peak was actually bigger than Ahrefs is now, which is a really interesting point.
Really?
Yeah, because we are a bootstrapped company. We're very, very like lean in terms of how the company's structured compared to like some of our competitors that have IPO'd and that kind of thing. So actually, there's a lot less kind of baggage and expectation and process around like getting buy-in and budget for stuff. So in many ways, we do a lot of small things that don't scale, maybe seem kind of like silly little experiments. But I think all of that is kind of in service of working out what our next few big bets are actually going to be. And, a good example of that is we're doing some programmatic content at the moment. It kind of makes sense. We're an SEO platform. We have all this SEO data. So we've been experimenting with creating tons of different types of programmatic content that showcases our data. So like we've got the top websites section of our own site where we show like the most searched for websites anywhere in the world. And they, in terms of traffic, like the impact they have is obviously staggering. It's going to dwarf anything else we could do. We're talking like millions of page views a month to those kinds of pages. But in the same vein, we just published recently a children's book about SEO. Like we basically just give it away at conferences at the moment. You can't even go and buy it anywhere. That's not going to never going to move the needle in terms of the same like magnitude, but it does. Every interaction we do have, like it makes a big impression on people. Like I think that is a real like brand loyalty, real care and interest and enthusiasm for what we do. So there's quite a big dichotomy there. We have like lots of tiny little like delight making moments and lots of like huge, big macro scale traffic plays. And probably not too much in the middle.
Sounds like the barbell strategy to me. Is there
the barbell? There we go. Yeah, I have to link out to that.
Barbell everything.
Yeah.
Is there like intentional logic behind that? Like, are you really trying to avoid that middle zone, or is it more so like, I guess, like how do ideas turn into prioritizations, and how do those get implemented? Like, is there a framework y'all use for those?
So one of the things I loved, and when I joined Tim, our CMO, he is a big advocate for just, we do stuff, right? If you have an idea, it's easier to just test it at a small scale than it is to talk about it and get people to agree to it.
Love that.
Blah, 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 blah. So if anyone has an idea, even if it sounds kind of weird, if we can make a case for it being worth experimenting with, we can get it up and done within like, a week or two in some cases. That even applies on the product front. If we get a few people suggest ideas for product features and we all go, oh, that's a really good idea, actually. That can be live in the product within a few weeks in a lot of cases. Because I generally, it's much easier. That is how you learn whether things will work. There's a limit to how much you can sit around and, hypothesize and theorize about something. Better to go and collect a little bit of data in the cheapest possible way and then let that inform whatever you do next.
Do you apply that to your content logic as well, outside of like the broader marketing programs? Like, are you sort of like, let's ship it, let's see the data, let's iterate based on the data, or are you sort of planning 3 months to 6 months in advance? Like, how's your agility with regards to your content programs?
Yeah, extremely agile / maybe you could call me disorganized to some extent. We try to do a lot with our content. Like we're trying to, hit all the core product keywords and keep our huge library of content updated. And that's like a full-time, like quite involved operation. But we're also just trying to experiment and write fun things and learn about that process and see what happens. And Tim actually said to me, like, it's okay if you use our blog like a blog. You can publish quick ideas. You don't have to get approval from other people.
Nice.
If it's your idea, put it out into the world and see what happens. And I love that. I really do love that. And quite often, like ideas that I think maybe they're a bit stupid and maybe I should have run past other people or maybe I shouldn't have written them, they tend to be the ones that have the most knock-on benefit in terms of like great reactions from people, maybe some product ideas, maybe it triggers a discussion internally like we had recently. So I love that. There's a great amount of freedom afforded to the content team at Ahrefs, I think.
Would you say your recent piece on why big companies produce bad content falls in that vein?
Yeah. So I've been writing a version of that for like 4 years, maybe, just like constantly noodling on it for a long, long time. And after I published it, I was a bit worried. I thought, is this just some kind of like something that only I find interesting? Is there actually any benefit to this for other people? Have I just made a hideous mistake? And the first bit of feedback I got from Tim was that like, I loved it. And it made me and our CEO, Dimitri, have a really big conversation about are programmatic content plays, like are they worthwhile or are they not? Which was awesome. Yeah, I love that. Actually content having an impact in the real world.
No, so it definitely resonated. Well, one, because you used my alma mater, HubSpot, as an example in that. And I think something about like their Bitcoin guide or like how to make a shrug emoji or something like that. And I can't tell you too much about like the internal decision making there. But yeah, I mean, the billboard metaphor is pretty apropos. But then I think working with, we work with very early stage startups, and we work with the Fortune 500, like huge enterprises. And even down to the metrics that they care about, or like the ability to track those metrics, we've got these early stage startups who have amazing like product analytics, and we hook that up to their web analytics. We stitch everything together, and we attribute like activated users and monetization to specific content pieces. Whereas the largest companies, they're like, we're spending $10 million in ads. What would it, like, if we were to rank for these keywords, how much would that cost us to spend in ads? Like, that's the metric that they care about. It's not, they're literally thinking of it like a billboard in terms of like, how many people would see this? It's not, they're not even like, when we talk about conversions, they're like, what the hell are you talking about? Like, you're like 4 steps down the funnel here. Will people see it? So that resonated with me just like from personal experience. It's like a different language that you're speaking almost, with large companies.
And I'm still learning that. I think, I've only ever worked, even when I have worked with enterprise companies, you only get like a little glimpse into how they think and function. And it was, in some ways, that's very anathema to like content marketing best practice, isn't it? If I made a pitch for these blog posts and say like, no one will ever convert, but man, a bunch of people will see them, I'd expect most people to shoot that down. But actually, no, there is benefit to that. And it's interesting hearing, I got nervous writing that because obviously it's a bit of like armchair commentary. You worked at HubSpot, and I had, Victor, who like does technical SEO, I think, at HubSpot, retweeted it recently with some like slightly cryptic thoughts about what I said. And I always want to try and get as close to the source as possible, but that's not always possible to do. It's always interesting to hear your take on that as well.
Well, what you're doing in some ways, like you're taking a curiosity, and I wouldn't say you're necessarily being contrarian for the sake of being contrarian, but you're sort of turning something on its head, which it goes back to this idea for me. Like everybody talks about like, oh, the old playbook and the new playbook, and I don't think there was ever like a universal playbook. I think a lot of people look at what HubSpot did and they're like, that was the playbook. But then you've got like bifurcation, you've got like heterogeneous, like there's tons of different approaches, but you're taking this idea of like, all right, is the old playbook, is it dead? Is it old? Or is it just like they care about different things? And you're sort of flipping it on its head. So it's contrarian in nature, but I don't think it's like that you sought out to say vanity metrics are good. I think it's more so like you're curious about why something exists, and you don't necessarily just jump to the conclusion that because it exists, it's stupid. You're like, maybe there's a reason that people do this, right? Maybe there's some validation, there's some like valid reasons for this approach.
Yeah, I tweeted recently about like Dialpad's programmatic SEO strategy. They're getting a bunch of traffic to like, local phone number landing pages. And I thought it was cool. I was like, that's, quick, cheap traffic for them. And all the comments I got were people saying, well, yeah, but what's the conversion rate on that? It's all just vanity traffic. And like, it's true. That's a really good point. But there was something in me that was like, well, do I think everyone that's done this approach is stupid? Like, no, there's probably some extra thinking about that. And yeah, I basically just wanted to try and work that out for myself, And then the question is, after you've written that, is how do you get other people to care about it? And that normally means wrapping it in some like slightly contrarian, spicy title that maybe loses some of the nuance of the actual post. But that's the curse of these platforms, isn't it?
You had a great meme that was like that midwit meme where on both ends of the IQ bell curve, it was like traffic is good. And it reminded me, we did an episode about what we called cope creep, where it's essentially, you've got like you see a guy and he's like rich and handsome and like athletic or like, well, all these good things. And you're like, yeah, but is he happy? You're like, yeah, the traffic is good. Like, it's fine. Like, if it doesn't, like, first, you don't know that it doesn't convert, but like, it seems like you were just trying to nitpick and find the exception just to make you feel better that you did, because you didn't do it, you have to like knock it down a peg. It's like cope,
Yeah, I love that. Like, if you said to any like head of SEO, head of content, would you like an extra 10 million visits a month? they'd be like, of course I would. Give me that immediately. No one's going to nitpick about the conversion rates there, I don't think.
That'd be pretty chill. Well, one other item that you mentioned you wanted to talk about, but I also wanted to bring up because you've been sort of on the forefront of writing about AI, its applications to content marketing. We're a few years in. What do you think the state of AI is? Like, where is the oversell? Where's the hype? And where's the actual utility at this point?
Yeah, good questions. I keep coming back to this idea that generative AI is too effortful at the moment. Like, you do have to work very, very hard to get good stuff out of it. And you can get amazing stuff out of it. Like, I have my mind blown by the experience of using it, but you do have to work very hard at it. And I think that's a good indicator that whatever format it's in now, it's a long way from what is, I think, the final use case of this technology, where pretty much every world-changing technology is in some way like, it surprises you at how easy and amazing and quick and painless it is to do stuff. So I see maybe the one use case that I just think I've come around to just being totally stupid is, wow. On the one hand, I don't think people should use the output of SAS tool number 87 to write all of their blog content without any human input. I think that's very silly. I'm also increasingly skeptical, I think, of lots of people are trying to do that and then slightly humanize it. They're writing the draft and then getting a human to review it and edit it. And I think mainly just because that is a terrible experience for the human on the other end of that. I think even if you get good results from that, you're going to have a hard time keeping people around, keeping the kind of institutional knowledge on your content team. I think it is.
You mean the human, the editor is, it's a bad experience for them.
Yeah, totally.
Not even the end reader, but more so the team working on that.
Yeah. And, so the last big project I did at Animals was actually trying to build our own AI content service, because it was we have to pay attention to this. We have to learn how it works. We have to build something, even if the thing we build is not the final product we offer to customers or whatever. And we tried a bunch of different iterations of that, different, allocations of human effort versus AI effort. And it was, even when we were publishing 40 articles a month, which is, when you've got a human person trying to review and edit this stuff, it was just a horrible experience. It was just not fun. It was kind of outsourcing all the fun parts of it and leaving behind the policing and copy editing part of it. So I think if you're going to use AI for content, either spend a huge amount of time and money and make some intensely incredible fine-tuned model that can get you 90% of the way to actually very good content, or else just use it as your muse, your creative counterpart, something that you can plug into your process to help with the bits that you don't enjoy. I'd be curious, how have you, Omniscient, how are you guys thinking about generative content? Does that play a function in what you do?
We just did a podcast last week, a kitchen side episode, sort of a redux on how we've used it, how it's maybe how we started looking at it and how we do now. And I think the broad takeaway was that actually as an active use, it's less useful. As a passive use, it's incredibly useful. So with Riverside that we're recording on, we're going to use their AI functionality to create the transcript, the timestamps, clips and quotes, and basically automate a large process that otherwise would have been very manual. We use it for background research. So for some podcast guests, not you, but if I'm interviewing somebody for the first time, I'll often say, what is this person known for? And I'll start splintering off questions and try to find some underrated aspect that others haven't asked them about. So I'll use it to speed up my research a little bit. There's some really cool use case. I think a lot of in-product use cases are really nice, but fireflies.ai and day.ai is a new one where it's essentially trying to combine that sort of meeting note taker with a CRM or a Notion of sorts. So it's a core productivity hub, a second brain in more of a true sense to me than the Rome research, which required very manual, proactive input. This is very passive. On the content side, the question that I ask often, so I think going back to first principles, there's this question that's more important than how are we using AI, which is what is our goal? And if you can't answer that and how AI is helping you accomplish that faster, cheaper, or in an innovative way, better, then you're sort of putting the cart before the horse and you're doing solutionism. But I actually think even before that, there's an important question, which is like pedantic shit that I think you'll like. But it's like, what is the value of information? I'm asking that of my, like when I do job interviews with candidates, I'll ask them that. It's incredibly esoteric, but it's very illustrative in terms of like how they think about content, SEO, customers, users. But like, there's this fundamental question, which is like, why do we consume anything? And is it merely for information transfer? Then in which case, like, maybe AI is perfectly fine. It's like we can all create glossaries, and like Google or Perplexity is going to index all of that, and it's going to be immediately accessible. But if that's the belief, then what the hell are we all doing creating new content? Like, then there's no novel, there's no alpha, there's no information gain, there's no utility in that. So obviously, if we're all still working on this, we have to believe there's something more to the ideas that we're espousing and like the education or entertainment potential. So that's the question that I go to first. And then I sort of work around the edges with how AI can potentially help me produce something that is net new valuable. So I know that's pretty esoteric, but that's how I'm thinking about it.
And there's a lot of AI use cases at the moment, at least, boil down to doing things that people can already do to a similar standard to a person, but a bit faster. And that's, in some way, that's kind of cool. That can be a very useful thing. My boss, Tim, is a bit of a cynic, and he always says, like, but why do you need to do that? Does it need to be faster? Is that actually a benefit? Is it worth, it's not this killer use case. But then I think there are some use cases you're starting to see where you do things that you could not do. Like, they enable completely new things. So we've been adding a few AI features into Ahrefs, and we're trying to be like very thoughtful and selective about how we do it, because obviously every company is like slapping on their AI feature set at the moment. And one of the things I use all the time is our AI intent analysis. So you look at like a list of blog posts, and normally understanding what the user wants is a very manual process, and you can look at it and you try and work out like what are the commonalities between these posts, like what do I need to create to do that. And the companies used to maybe try and automate that by classifying it, is this transactional intent or whatever, and they'd use like simple keyword matching. And the thing AI has let us do using our LLMs is actually to generate that intent for every SERP in a much more nuanced and interesting way. It's almost like having a person read it for you and identify like the actual things people want out of the content. And that's cool. I've never been able to do that before at that scale. So hopefully, once all the hype does eventually wane a little bit, like there will be actual use cases that are things that we've never been able to do enabled by this. I think, was it Benedict Evans wrote a blog post recently about how, LLMs are basically a solution in search of a problem. And I think that's quite true at the moment.
I totally think that. I mean, we're starting to see some more mature use cases like the one you had mentioned. I'm curious, how would you describe the value of content or information? Like, why do you think people consume what we produce?
I mean, it's normally in service of like being able to do something to make their lives better in some capacity, isn't it? Either they have like a problem that needs immediately solving and they want steps to do that, or boredom. Reducing boredom is quite a good mechanism in some cases. Like, that's valuable as well.
Why are you learning Python?
I've kind of always wanted to. I've always, worked with software companies, and joining a software company, it made me realize how kind of mute I was. Like, I don't speak the same language as these people, and it makes it quite hard to understand how the company functions. And I've always wanted to do it, but I've never had like a good access point into it. I tried all these different boot camps and Code Academy and stuff, and it never really stuck. But I saw Paul Graham tweet about Replit's 100 Days of Python, actually saying how few people finish it, which I thought was interesting. And I checked it out, and it really hooked me. It was like 100 days, 30 minutes a day, like making a bunch of really useful, practical things with every lesson. So I thought I'd give it a go, stick with it and try it out. And it's actually some of the most fun I've had doing anything in the past few years. It was an incredible experience.
Yeah, I learned R, and I completely agree. It's like weirdly satisfying in the sense that like the only analogous thing I can think of is like math problems back in school, like when that click would happen when you're like, oh, I get it. Like that happens over and over and over again when you're programming. And also it has this very satisfying feeling of building something from scratch that can work and do things. So I resonate with that. Do you think that it's worthwhile for content marketers in general to learn Python or maybe another technical skill? Like, do you think it's added depth to what you do on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, I do think so. I don't want to say, you have to go and learn coding to be good at your job, because even I'm still fumbling around the edges of this, but like, there's something really valuable about exploring something that is very different to what you do. Like the perspective, like trying to think like a programmer is so, in many ways, so very different to like how I think as like a marketer or a writer in some ways. And I think there's one part of it which is useful, which is learning how to do things like through Python or in R, which is cool. That can benefit, do data visualizations, call APIs. But also just that different perspective, looking at problems in a different way, understanding the companies you work with in a different way. I think that's going to have probably a bigger impact on, like, hopefully the rest of my career than the actual tactical part of it. Generally, I think it's a good idea to go and plug knowledge gaps and do the things that are scary and not worry about whether it fits into your skill set or not,
Yeah, I totally agree with that. All right, I have one more question. It's completely irrelevant to everything else we discussed, but on your form, you wrote, the universal yearning for the woods that we all have. Can you expound on that?
I don't know whether this is something that is like, remote tech workers are particularly predisposed to, but I just basically want to spend my entire life like on my own in the woods, like with maybe like a hatchet and the ability to create fire from nothing. I basically spend all my time like hiking, getting out. Yeah, homestead. I want a homestead, I got into photography basically as a way to like try and gamify hiking a little bit, hike somewhere, take a cool picture, hike back. I feel amazing when I'm in the woods, nothing really compares to that. I'm sure if I only did that every day, I'd probably yearn for my, office and my Elgato key lights and my camera and things like that. But at the moment, I just want to go live in the woods, basically.
I know. I completely go back and forth on that. I moved to New York City, so the complete opposite move. But when I was back in Texas, I used to long for that. And, like we would do camping trips to experience some portion of that. And still, I mean, especially in New York, maybe every few months, I just get this drive, this like impulse to go out and be in the middle of nowhere.
And I literally just got back from a camping trip. I'm trying to imbue that into my children as well, take them out into the wilderness and not quite let them fend for themselves, but let them experience nature free from technology and pollution and cars and noise and crowds and all that kind of thing.
I do think there's something specifically true about like remote knowledge workers where, especially if you're not working in an office, like you don't have the kind of other people to surround you and like remind you why you're doing the thing you do. It can feel a little bit isolating. Like there's a little bit of like, it's hard to put my finger on, but like you sit in front of a laptop all day and like you do your meetings virtually and everything feels very abstracted. And then like nature, the woods, everything's real. It's like, there's nothing fake. It's like, this is the real world. And there's some like jarring juxtaposition of those two extremes.
I made a meme once about like the kind of anhedonia of remote work. And it was me sitting at my desk perfectly still. And it was captioned like the best day of my working life. And then it was me sitting at my desk completely still. And it was captioned the worst day of my working life. Because, everything that happens is mediated by like through the screen. And maybe that's a coping mechanism. You detach yourself a little bit from it, and it always does feel a bit abstract and a bit foreign to you. But it is good to go and experience things, isn't it? To like flail your body about and touch stuff and interact with the world in a way that you can't when you're just putting words on the screen or pixels on the screen.
Yeah. Well, maybe someday we'll do a whole podcast about that. We can go get a cabin in the woods and do an IRL podcast. But for now, I think we gave a lot of information and value about SEO and content. So let's wrap up here. Where do you want to point people online? Where can people find you?
Please come and read the Ahrefs blog if you aren't already doing that. We are trying to do more beyond just SEO content at the moment. So hopefully there'll be stuff for everyone there. I do also have a couple of courses if people ever want to go and learn about editing or thought leadership content. Otherwise, I'll be hanging out on these social platforms trying to game the algorithm and be very cynical about what I share on there.
Nice. Well, thank you so much. This was another great conversation.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Alex.